welcome back to the Deep Dive. If you really want to understand how Washington works, sometimes the headlines aren't the place to look.
That's absolutely right. You often need to look at the paperwork, the formal documents directing the government.
Exactly. A lot of really significant changes can hide in plain sight, buried under dense, formal language.
Yeah, and that language can make it almost impossible for, the average person to really see how it might affect them or their community.
So today, we're giving you a shortcut, a fast track to understanding one specific, and I think pretty consequential, source document.
We're talking about an executive order focused on making some big changes to the federal bureaucracy.
That's the one. It's Executive Order 14238, signed by President Donald J. Trump back on March 14, 2025. The title is Continuing the Reduction of the Federal Bureaucracy.
And our mission here is pretty straightforward. Translate this formal legal language into terms that make sense.
Yeah, what agencies are actually affected? How exactly are they supposed to change?
And crucially, what could this mean for services maybe you rely on every day?
Okay, let's unpack this.
So maybe first things first, let's ground this. Where does this document even come from? It was published in the Federal Register.
Right, the Federal Register. Not exactly beach reading for most people.
No. But think of it as the government's official daily newspaper, almost. It's where executive orders, new regulations, official rules, it's where they're all formally announced.
So it's the official record.
Exactly. And this specific one, if you want to look it up, is 90 FR 13043, published March 20th, 2025.
Okay, so it's official, it's out there, and Section 1 of the order itself, it doesn't really beat around the bush about why it exists, does it?
Not at all. It states pretty clearly that the purpose is to keep reducing parts of the federal bureaucracy that the president has decided are, quote, unnecessary.
Unnecessary. That's a strong word in this context.
It is. It sets up this explicit policy goal. Continue streamlining, continue cutting back government functions deemed non-essential by the executive.
And this is where I think it gets really interesting, because it's not just a general goal. Section 2 gets incredibly specific about how this reduction has to happen.
Right. It lays out this two-pronged strategy, and it applies to a specific list of government entities. This is the real mechanism.
Okay, so what's the first prong?
The first one deals with what you might call the easier targets, non-statutory components and functions.
Non-statutory, meaning?
Meaning things that weren't explicitly created or required by a specific law passed by Congress. Think discretionary programs, initiatives maybe started by a previous administration or an agency itself.
Okay, so optional stuff, basically.
Kind of. The order says these shall be eliminated to the maximum extent consistent with applicable law.
So if Congress didn't pass a law telling you to do it, stop doing it. Full stop.
Pretty much. To the maximum extent possible under the law, yes.
That seems, well, maybe somewhat standard if you're trying to cut costs.
Yeah.
But the second prong,
Yeah.
that sounds different, more aggressive.
Oh, absolutely. The second prong targets the functions that are based on law, the statutory functions and the people who perform them.
Okay, so things Congress did create.
Exactly. And for these, the order directs the entities to, quote, reduce the performance of their statutory functions and associated personnel to the minimum presence and function required by law.
Wait, hang on. Minimum presence required by law.
Yeah.
Even if Congress set up an agency with a clear mission.
Yes.
The argument here is the executive can basically slash everything except what is absolutely undeniably required by the letter of the law.
That's precisely the strategy. Pare it down to the bare legal bones.
Wow, that sounds like it pushes right up against what the law intended versus just what it literally says. It feels like a major test of executive power.
It absolutely is. It essentially forces the head of the agency to defend every single program, maybe even every single employee, as being indispensable just to meet the absolute minimum legal requirements.
I don't have much time. I will get to that.
No, very little time. It's an instruction to cut deep, leaving only the skeleton crew, legally speaking.
That is a very targeted, very aggressive approach. And it applies, you said, to a specific list.
Yes, 7 specific entities are named in Section 2A.
7. Okay, let's walk through them, because this list is, well, it's kind of surprising. It touches a lot of different areas.
It really does. It starts with some focused on, say, labor and international stuff. Number 1 is the Federal Mediation and Conciliation Service, or FMCS.
FMCS, what do they do?
They're actually a small but pretty vital agency. They step in when labor contract talks break down between unions and management. Think big industries trying to prevent strikes or lockouts.
Okay, so they mediate disputes to keep things running smoothly, economically speaking.
Exactly. Their work has a direct impact on economic stability. Reducing them to a minimum presence could mean more unresolved disputes, potentially.
Okay. Moving from the workplace.
Yeah.
What's next?
Next, we shift to global outreach. Number 2 is the United States Agency for Global Media, USAGM.
USAGM, that oversees things like Voice of America.
Precisely. Voice of America, Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, those kinds of non-military international broadcasting operations. They're basically the U.S. government's main communication channel to audiences abroad.
So minimizing their presence means reducing America's voice or narrative internationally.
Potentially, yes. Shrinking that footprint, that's the implication.
Okay, number 3 takes a totally different turn. Culture and academia.
Right. Number 3 is the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars. It's actually part of the Smithsonian Institution.
The Wilson Center, I've heard of it. Policy research, right, fellowships.
Exactly. It's a major hub in D.C. for policy research. They host scholars, former diplomats, people from all over the world studying global issues. It's a key link between government, academia, and international affairs.
So cutting this back is about reducing the government's direct role in funding that kind of research and dialogue.
That seems to be the idea. Less direct support for that kind of policy incubation.
All right, number 4. This one, I think, hits close to home for potentially millions of people. The Institute of Museum and Library Services, IMLS.
Yeah, IMLS is. It's a big one in terms of community impact. It's the main source of federal support for the nation's libraries and museums.
So the grants that help your local library run programs, maybe offer internet access, buy books.
A lot of that funding flows through IMLS. They provide grants, technical help, support to thousands of institutions, big city museums, small rural libraries, tribal libraries, you name it.
It's kind of surprising to see that on a list targeted for reduction to a minimum presence, libraries and museums feel pretty fundamental.
It is surprising to many, yes. It raises immediate questions about what that minimum would even look like for services people use constantly.
Definitely. Okay, shifting gears again, but staying domestic. Number 5 deals with a major social issue. The United States Interagency Council on Homelessness.
Right, USICH. Their job is basically coordination. They bring together all the different federal agencies that touch homelessness, housing, Veterans Affairs, Health and Human Services, labor, education.
They try to make sure everyone's working together, not duplicating efforts or leaving gaps.
Exactly. They coordinate the entire federal strategy. Cutting that back to a minimum could really hamper the ability to have a unified, effective response across the country.
Makes sense. Okay, number 6 focuses on the economy, but at a very local level. The Community Development Financial Institutions Fund, the CDFI Fund.
Yeah, the CDFI Fund. This one's really interesting. It supports specific kinds of financial institutions, CDFIs.
And what are those?
Think community banks, credit unions, loan funds, often working in places that traditional big banks might overlook. Low-income communities, rural areas, inner cities, places needing investment.
Okay, so the CDFI Fund gives them support, capital.
Exactly. It provides capital and resources so these local institutions can offer affordable loans, mortgages, help small businesses start up things that build wealth in underserved communities.
So this isn't just cutting a budget line. It's potentially cutting off a flow of capital to places that need it most for basic economic development.
That's the direct potential impact, yes. It's quite significant for local economic empowerment in many parts of the country.
Wow. Okay, one more. Number 7.
Number 7 is the Minority Business Development Agency, or MBDA.
MBDA.
Okay.
Their mission seems pretty clear from the name.
It is. They focus specifically on helping minority-owned businesses get started, grow, and succeed, trying to level the playing field in terms of access to capital, government contracts, things like that.
Okay, so that's the list of 7. FMCS, USAGM, Wilson Center, IMLS, USCH, CDFI Fund, and MBDA. Quite a range.
A very diverse range, touching labor, foreign policy, culture, libraries, homelessness, community finance, and minority businesses.
And the directive to reduce them to a minimum is immediate. So how is compliance actually enforced? What's the mechanism to make sure this happens and happens fast?
Well, the enforcement mechanism is built for speed and pressure. Section 2B lays out a mandatory reporting requirement. The head of each one of those 7 entities has to submit a report, not to their usual boss, but directly to the Director of the Office of Management and Budget, OMB.
OMB? The Budget Office. Makes sense they'd be involved. But the timeline?
The timeline is quite something. They have to submit this report within 7 days of the date of the order.
7 days? That's barely a business week.
Correct.
How is that even possible? To basically audit your entire agency's legal foundation, figure out what's the absolute minimum, and write a report in 7 days.
It's an incredibly aggressive timeline. It clearly signals the urgency and the seriousness of the directive. But practically, it puts immense pressure on those agency heads.
What does the report have to say?
It has to confirm they are complying with the order, and crucially, it has to spell out exactly which functions, if any, they believe are statutorily required and cannot be eliminated. They have to justify why anything remains.
So prove why you must keep doing something, legally.
Precisely. The justification has to be immediate and, presumably, very strong.
And OMB is the judge of that justification. How do they enforce it?
Through the money. That's Section 2C. OMB is explicitly directed to reject any future funding requests from these 7 entities if those requests are inconsistent with this reduction order.
So they control the purse strings.
Exactly. They become the gatekeeper. If an agency asks for money to do something OMB believes is not part of that absolute legal minimum,
Request denied.
request denied. The only exceptions are for funding needed for those minimum required functions, or, interestingly, funding needed to actually terminate a function. Shutting things down costs money too.
Okay, so the enforcement is financial, and it's fast. But let's circle back to that core phrase, minimum presence and function required by law. You mentioned it's repeated.
Yes, it's the central pillar of the reduction strategy for statutory functions. And it's where things get, well, potentially very contentious.
Because who gets to define minimum?
Exactly. That's the huge question. If the law says, for example, the Institute of Museum and Library Services must exist and give grants, does minimum presence mean one person answering the phone?
Or maybe 0 staff, and the function just stops happening, even if the law technically requires it.
It opens up that possibility. Can a function truly be performed with near 0 resources? The executive order seems to imply the president, through OMB, gets to define that minimum very, very narrowly.
But Congress created these agencies. Couldn't they argue that minimum required by law implies enough resources to actually do the job Congress intended?
Absolutely.
Right.
You could see legal challenges, congressional pushback, arguing that crippling an agency financially is effectively defying the statute that created it. It sets up a potential clash over the separation of powers.
And the agency heads are caught right in the middle.
Right in the middle. They have a direct order from the president, implemented via OMB's budget power, but they also have statutory obligations passed by Congress, possibly over many decades. It's a legal and practical tightrope.
So let's try to pull this together. This deep dive into Executive Order 14238 shows a really specific, unusually rapid attempt by the executive branch to shrink or even dismantle 7 particular agencies.
Yeah, and the method is pretty aggressive. Draw a hard line between what's strictly required by law and what's not. Eliminate the latter and shrink the former down to the absolute bare minimum.
And enforce it immediately through a tight deadline and OMB's control over funding.
It really highlights how quickly an administration can try to reshape parts of the government, especially agencies that maybe aren't always in the headlines but have, real impacts on the ground.
Impacts on things like labor stability, global communication, research, libraries, museums, homelessness support, community lending, minority businesses.
Things that affect communities, culture, economic development, social safety nets.
Which leads us, I think, to the final thought we want to leave you with today. Something for you to mull over.
Given that this order targets agencies dealing directly with things like your local library or support for struggling communities or help for the homeless,
how might shrinking them to just the minimum presence required by law actually affect the services you see or maybe even rely on?
And maybe more fundamentally, in areas like these where the need is often measured in human terms, not just legal clauses, is that bare legal minimum ever really going to be sufficient?
What does minimum truly mean when you're talking about community support or cultural access?
That definition of minimum, that's the battleground. And the results, well, they'll likely be felt far beyond Washington, in towns and cities all across the country.
Definitely something to think about. Thanks for diving deep with us today.
Yeah, thanks for listening.
Until next time, keep digging into those sources.